connection and ties with the rise of nationalism. So, and that's why now in Kurdish, in the literature on Kurds, even in English, people more and more, they use the word Kurdiety, because it is, yes, it's a reference to Kurdish ethnicity, and at the same time, this type of Kurdishness is more like Kurdism rather than Kurdishness, because it shows a political stance or political, let's say, it's a political stance in a way, and or it determines your, it has a political aspect to it, in a sense that being a Kurd is not just sheer ethnicity or ethnic belonging. You also care about the very situation of the Kurds, their rights, their demands, and other things. So in this sense, Kurdiety, and especially it's a lot more common in the among the Soran Kurds, but this is something that is very political, and therefore it's not just simple ethnic belonging. Yes. Very good. So, okay. Yes, he sees that Nursi thinks of nationalism as something that even refines your character and morality, because it almost, if you become a nationalist, it's a leap from this tribal affiliation to feeling an affiliation and belonging to a nation. So this is the situation. That's why he believes for the Kurds, in order to overcome the communal tyranny, they have to become conscious of their nationalist or national belongings. Yes. So, yes. Anyways, it says every human relation is either based on justice or tyranny, and every beauty in relation origin. So anyways, anything good, because he was a religious person, so he believes any beautiful thing in constitutionalism, in Madaniyat, civilization, they are all rooted in the in religion and Islam, because religions are divine messages, and prophets have come and taught morality to human beings. And so as a religious person, he finds the source of morality to be divine, that was taught to human beings through prophets, and on and on. And therefore, whatever you have in modern civilization, it must be in some ways, either it exists in religion or rooted in the religion in a way. So this is another phenomenological approach to the issue of morality and civilization and so forth. But of course, later with the CUP in power, he became extremely disillusioned with the Madaniyat or civilization, and for him, modern state is the very essence of the civilization. And yes, because he likes the fact that there is a lot of things that comes with the civilization, like all the achievements in science, medicine, and technology, but the modern, he sees in the modern state the capacity for destruction that it was not, did not existed before. So anyways, I'm trying to conclude in order to be able to talk about Sheikh Said a little bit as well. He had a very conflicting stand about the Ottoman Caliphate, because in some ways for him it represented a kind of the last fortress that would protect Muslims from European colonial incursions or European colonial aggressions. But at the same time, he had a problem with the existing forms of caliphate, and at the same time, yes, when it came to the curse, he had this issue that if the modern state, or the way the CUP type state that was followed by republicanism, or the Republican Turkish Republic, then it was possible that they would be destructive to the Kurds. And not because he liked the existing caliphate a lot, but he felt under the caliphate could be more protected. So this is another thing. But he was trying to reform both two institutions that had this religious standing and religious characteristic. One was Sheikh al-Islam, the highest religious rank, and the caliphate. And he believed that Sheikh al-Islam can be turned into a legislative body that various Muslim scholars from around the world, let's say 40 or something around this, scholars could come from around the world, and instead of one person talking about religious affairs and issues in the Muslim world, you can have a group that would be more in tune with the constitutional spirit, the way he understood constitutionalism mostly as a form of council that was based on consultation and exchange of ideas and views and so forth. And the other thing was that the caliphate would be a symbolic thing. Again, that's like a constitutional monarch that would be a sign or a symbol of unity among the Muslim world, but it doesn't mean that the Muslims around the world have the right to have their own state. So caliph, instead of being an empire and ruling an emperor and ruling an empire, it would be the symbolic figure that in a way symbolically tie all the Muslim nations together. So it would be a kind of a symbolic body that would represent Muslim world, and this way he mostly looked at it as a kind of symbol of unity, and it would be one of the things that Muslims could hold on to for their unity. So this was the reforms that he was trying to introduce into these institutions. So I'm not going to talk about the rest of the stuff here. Let's talk about the second figure, which is Sheikh Said, the one you see here. Sheikh Said is known, again, he was a Naqshbandi Sheikh. Said Nursi and Sheikh Said knew each other, and so he is known for his revolt in uprising in 1925. The uprising was very much premature, and it wasn't a kind of Kemalist state. So anyways, I assume that everyone knows Kemalism. That's why, or what do you mean by Kemalism? That's why I have not, I usually mention it without defining it. The ideology, the nationalist, Turkish nationalist ideology that is associated with Mustafa Kemal, to be very, and roughly this is the definition, it's called Kemalism. So, about Sheikh Said, of course, we are learning about him more and more. And actually, just recently, a friend had sent me 2 books that are related to his views and ideas, that it was mostly like a collection of his views and fatwas and other things, religious verdicts. I haven't had a chance to see them yet. But anyway, people are working on in the recent years, there have been more things rather than most of the scholarship that so far has existed based on what mostly non-Kurdish documents say about Sheikh Said, be it with the Turkish Republic's documents, British documents, Iranian documents, but Sheikh Said's own views have not been very much accessible, or what he say. I used some literature that existed at the time by people who were part of this uprising, people like Ismail Haqqi Shawis, who was, yes, and others that were there or had written in Surani or Kermanji Kurdish. And so anyways, in terms of his connection with politics, apparently, at least the way his grandson Abdul Malik Frat says, he has written a book about him. He died. Abdul Malik Frat also died. But he has written a book about him, and he said that according to him, since 1910, just 2 years after the second revolution, or 1 year after the second revolution, the constitutional revolution, he was following the Kurdish issue and concerned about it. He was a scholar, but because of he's known mostly due to his uprising. Not many people have learned much, or people usually don't know much, and generally about his scholarship side. So he was, of course, a Sufi master, and based on what we know, he knew Islamic philosophy as well as logic. These are things that were taught in Kurdish madrasas. In terms of his following, apparently he had about 60,000 followers in Kurdistan at the time, and at least he was the master for at least 12 prominent scholars in Kurdistan. And in addition to that, of course, he had given up in teaching in madrasa, and he was mostly dealing with guidance and other things. But he was also very much literate and educated about other areas of Kurdistan, because he had already also been in trade, and he had visited the south and the east Kurdistans, and so that's why he was familiar. And at the same time, he was relative to this guy, who was executed very early, but he was a very, very prominent figure in the early politics of, let's say, 1920 politics of northern Kurds in the in Turkey. His name was Khalid Bey Gibran. He was a colonel in terms of military background. And he was the person who created something that is known as Azadi or Comité Istiqlal Kurdistan or Jabhaka Azadi Kurdistan, that was founded in 1921. And so anyways, there are a number of things that leads to the Kurdish disillusionment with the Ottoman, with the Turks, because mostly during the wars of independence in the post-World I Turkey, there was a great unity and collaboration between the Kurds and the Turks. There were two conferences or gatherings that are known in the Turkish history. In both of them, there were certain there were talks about unity, and even in 1923, Mustafa Kemal still talks about a country of the two Muslim nations. So it would be Kurdish Muslim nation and Turkish Muslim nation. So they were still talking about a multinational country, that country that had to exist. And even you can find in the parliament notes that Mustafa Kemal says that we cannot ignore the right of self-determination of the Kurds, because the right of self-determination is a very important thing in the world today. This is what Mustafa Kemal says. These are paraphrase. I am paraphrasing. I don't. And then the issue of the Kurdish autonomy, it was discussed even in 1923. And there are documents from there that so the Kurds supposed to be given autonomy, but at the same time, Azadi was, or people who created Azadi were very much they had doubts about the sincerity of the Turkish political establishment, or the Kemalist group. So. And Khalid Bey was captured earlier, and Sheikh Said was kind of forced to an armed struggle with the state. He had a number, this is how the incident started in 1925. He had a number of guests that were followed by the state, and they asked Sheikh Said to turn them in. They go to his home, and he says, I cannot do that. These are my guests, and you cannot ask this. And then so the fire, gunfire broke out, and this is how it leads to a major uprising that, of course, Sheikh Said and Khalid Bey and others were preparing for that, but it was a premature thing that before it happened that before what they had planned. So, which it worked in the Kurdish disadvantage, because they were successful in the beginning, but by the time they reached Diyarbakir, so they slowly, and the state was able to bring forces. And so the details of, if you wanna, one of the books that talks about the details of that uprising is a book by Robert Olson that says 1925 Kurdish uprising, I think, Robert Olson. But to come back to the issue of nationalism and the, because there is a lot of things said about Sheikh Said. Since the defeat of the uprising, the state has been trying to say that Sheikh Said was Shariati, meaning he was Shariati, trying to bring back Islamic religious law and bring back the Ottoman Caliphate, which is, again, it's not, I really recommend to read the chapter because there I have given a plethora of examples, and mostly from the state documents, which we cannot discuss them here, that shows how the whole thing was framed and the state was behind it, and they were trying to say that Sheikh Said was not a religious, but while they know he was a religious, and they were ordering that the newspapers to talk about the event in a certain way and other things. But just look at a number of things. For instance, yes, certain things are there that are, we might think them to be racist, or the discourse is certainly racial. But again, it shows that what the state says about Sheikh Said and the revolution is entirely different than what was actually taking place. So there was a declaration going around while the uprising was ongoing that says Turks came among us as immigrants, and they have, for the last 400 years, they have used Islam to enslave us. So in a way, you see how, just like Sheikh Ubaidullah questions the sincerity, the religious sincerity of the other. So the entire 400 history is questioned, and Turkish Islamic religiosity is questioned. This actually, of course, is not true historically speaking, but the thing is, this is another issue, that whether for example, that figure says is true historically or not is something not very much or secondary to our discussion here. What is important is the way the other is framed, or the way the other is perceived. And especially in our case, the way the others understanding of the religion, Islam in this case, or the way the others' devotion to the religion or to Islam is understood or seen or perceived is the most important thing, because you see the religiosity of the other side is always downplayed, because we are talking about these people that are very, very much religious. Not only religious, they are figures they are religious leaders, religious scholars, Sufi masters, mostly, who have thousands or tens of thousands of followers, or in the case of Sheikh Ubaidullah, they are talking about over 2 million followers. So it is very important, and that's why mostly they have been misunderstood. Yes, there have been attempts to intentionally misunderstand them or frame them in the wrong way. But there is also these attempts to, there is misunderstanding as well, especially because mostly in the recent years, let's say in the last 60, 70 years, nationalism is also assumed to be secular. So this binary understanding of nationalism and religion has been very misleading in studying Kurdish history. So this is what Sheikh Said does. Like Sheikh Ubaidullah, he questions the authenticity of Turkish Islam. He says, the way he portrays it historically for the last 400s, I don't know why he talks about 400s, must be because probably when after the Sultan Suleiman and goes to this region, and then you have slowly even the Arab Muslim world is conquered. It could be a reference to that. But anyways, so he tries to portray the historical approach of Turks as a nation to Islam as a kind of instrumental use or utilization of the Islam for certain political gains or for domination. So he says that for the last 100 years, they have been trying to enslave us with Islam. Not because, so it's not that he disowns Islam. He questions the Islam of the other, but he says, questions in a way, he says that they try to use Islam for domination. So their approach to Islam has been an instrumental approach. So this is one of the things that is very important. You see the way even Said Nursi was trying to say that, okay, for example, even today, if most of the Islamists in Turkey, they revere the Ottoman history as an authentic Islamic history. Even these ideas about New Ottomanism and things that are said about Erdogan and AKP, usually it comes with a reverence mostly for the last major caliph, which was Abdul Hamid. So even there are times that they compare Erdogan with Abdul Hamid. But for someone like Said Nursi, the entire post-Rashidun era is what? Is a history of tyranny. And the thing did not exist there. The, what's called? They were not legitimate states. They were only tyrannical states, and therefore they were not caliphate states, or the rule was not a caliphal rule. So this is the similarity that you have here. And the other thing that he does, which is very important, it's not, even he, and this is what I'm quoting Abdul Malik Farad again, he says, Sheikh Said had doubts about Mustafa Kemal for a long time, but he did not believe that, he was not in the opinion that people might follow what he's going to say. But when he abolished the caliphate in 1924, when he abolished the caliphate, what happened was that Sheikh Said said, now Turks have unveiled, Turks, and especially Mustafa Kemal, has unveiled his own true face. Now they no longer have to pretend that they care about Islam and Muslim institutions and other things. So the thing is, to assume that he was trying to bring back a Turkish caliphate or something like this is completely out of the picture, because he has this kind of blanket statements about not just the Turkish state, but even the Turkish society and people. And he says they have pivoted toward eastward. So now, so this pivot thing, which is actually, it says Qibla, because when you face Mecca as a Qibla or the pivot, as Muslims usually this is where they face, but he says they have pivoted eastward. Now their Qibla is Europe. And another thing that is very important, that Sheikh Said not only tried to mobilize Alawis, so because he was emphasizing on the thing, on the Kurdishness, so which it doesn't go with the idea of Sharia or being pro-Sharia or trying to bring a Sharia rule, because he was very much insistent to recruit Alawis into his uprising. But of course, due to historical rift, the historical rift that exists between the Sunnis and the Alawis, he was not successful. So, but according to some Russian documents, even some Assyrians that existed or they were around in the region, they supported Sheikh Said, which is a very interesting thing. The idea of the caliphate, based on the documents and the declarations that exist, he never talks about bringing back any form of caliphate. So, and even if he believed that the caliphate was the only form of legitimate state, which I have seen no indication of that, he still doesn't, he would have created a Kurdish caliphate, most likely. And even in the court, when they say, why did you started this uprising? He says, because I wanted to defend the Kurdish rights. And many times I tried to negotiate with the state about the Kurdish rights, but they always ignored us. So the idea that the caliphate was the major factor in the Kurdish uprising is not, and there are many people like Ismet Inonu, the prime minister, what was Okhyar? I think Adnan or something like this. I don't remember the first name. They all, and Kazım Karabakir, they all talk about the nationalist nature of the Kurdish Sheikh Said's uprising. But the thing was, actually, it was a religious nationalist. And this the problem that even this thing has been there, that they say it's a nationalist movement in the guise of religion. So, but here I have, this picture is Sayyid Bey. Sayyid Bey is, I want to introduce him because of the his importance as a political figure and as a statesman. He was the Minister of Justice, and at the same time he was the actual religious advisor of Mustafa Kemal. When there was the discussion about the abolishment of caliphate, he said something. He has a very interesting discussion in, for whoever knows Ottoman, probably actually one of the most concise and very strong scholarly speaking presentation on the issue of caliphate. Because actually most of the religious figures like Al-Malli Hamdi Yazir, Safwat Bey, and these are important figures. Al-Malli Hamdi Yazir's Quran Ma'ali, or the Quranic commentary on Quran, still is a state sanctioned and the most well-known Quranic translation and interpretation, that they were all much longer, a lot longer before Mustafa Kemal. They were pro the destruction or the abolishment of the caliphate. And actually until around the Lausanne Treaty, which I'm going to talk about it in a second, Mustafa Kemal was still defending caliphate. But Sayyid Beg in that talk says something that he specifically refers to the ulamas of Kurdistan, that says when he talks about the Kurdish ulama and Ottoman Caliphate. Okay, gentlemen, let's not deceive ourselves. We cannot mislead the Islamic world. They have many scholars, and they are all erudite, more erudite than us. They have access to the Islamic sources. Do you think they do not know the real Islamic Caliphate, what the real Islamic Caliphate is? Meaning our Islamic Caliphate is not the real one. From a religious point of view, the ulama of India, Egypt, Yemen, Najd, and that of Kurdistan do not recognize our kings as caliphs. Okay. Do you really believe that the ulama in Kurdistan take the debate or the Ottoman Caliphate seriously? Bravo shouts in the Majlis or the parliament. The ulama of those regions have never recognized our kings as caliphs. So for the people who are not familiar with the context and the fact that the Kemal state has always tried to portray Kurdish uprising in 1925 as a Shariati and pro-caliphate, this one is very interesting. Says the ulama of Kurdistan have never recognized our caliphate as a true caliphate. And so the head of the uprising is one of the most prominent of ulama of Kurdistan. So anyways, so the state tried to, there have been many ways of talking about Sheikh Said, depending on the politics of the time. Some of them, they called him Shariati, some of them that actually Sheikh Said had nothing to do with the revolt. And some of them, and mostly the Kemalists, were trying to say Sheikh Said was incited, or Sheikh Said was brought to this, and the uprising, the whole thing behind the uprising was, Britain was behind it. And Sheikh Said worked for them. And actually, at one point, even Abdullah Öcalan repeats this Kemalist view. So anyways, and this has been the Kemalist story and narrative mostly for the last 100 years about Sheikh Said, that he was, so what was going on at the time? So Mosul was a disputed area. The Kemalists were saying that it's ours, and the Britain was saying that it's ours, it's our domain, because Britain at the time was ruling Iraq. So Iraq was officially a colony of Britain. And there were many discussions about it in the League of Nations and other things, that what can be done with the Mosul. So, and we are talking about a situation that Kemalists were very much concerned about the Kurdish perception about Kemalist rule, because in 1923, Mustafa Kemal himself says that Mosul is very important for us for two reasons. One, because of the oil, and the other because of the Kurdism. So meaning, one, economically important, and second, it's politically important. If Mosul is ours because of the oil, of course, we'll have all this oil, we have this oil-rich region, and that's why we cannot give up on it. And the second thing is, there is, because there is a possibility that it could give because Mosul was, as a city, was part of the Mosul province. Before, in the Ottoman era, there were three, Iraq was three provinces: Baghdad, Mosul, and Basra. So the Kurds were all in the Mosul province. All the Kurdistan, Iraqi Kurdistan, southern Kurdistan was in the Mosul province. And Mosul city, of course, it was on the surrounding of Mosul city. Today's Mosul province today is different from the historical Mosul province, was the disputed area. And the Kemalists were claiming that's theirs, and so they felt that, okay, it's a hotbed of Kurdish nationalism, and if it is out of Kemalist control, there is a possibility for a Kurdish entity that could come to being there, or a Kurdish entity might be formed, a Kurdish political entity. So therefore, Mustafa Kemal was thinking that if Mosul was under Kemalist control, Kemalist state's control, they could control a possible Kurdish movement, or they would prevent it, or because he says if Mosul is outside of our state control, and then there is a Kurdish political entity that might emerge from there, it would affect the Kurds that are under our control. So this is the thing. So it was not that something that there is a lot of talk about Kurdish nationalism, even Mustafa Kemal, that he tries to uses religious discourse, and he sends various letters to various Kurdish sheikhs and community leaders. You have, even if you look on the internet, you find Mustafa Kemal in religious garb and then with Kurdish ulama walking around and trying to deceive them and all the things. So he's Sheikh Kemal there. But anyways, the thing is, what I'm trying to say, actually, it was the state, the Turkish state was using religious discourse, Islamic discourse, to use Kurds and to bring to its side. And before the thing, before the Sheikh Said's uprising, Kurds were in the Iraq, today's Iraqi Kurdistan or southern Kurdistan, were sympathetic towards the Turks, or the Turkish state, let's say, because they considered them as their Muslim brothers. So even that's why in the League of Nations, the Turks propose a plebiscite, that let's see what the people think and let them vote about this, about the fate of Mosul based on people's votes. But I think it was Churchill who said these ignorant people don't know anything of plebiscite. So because he believed that the Kurds would vote in favor of Turkey. I'm trying to give you the complexity of the situation and how Sheikh Said, pretty much Sheikh Said's uprising sabotaged the Kemalist plan for Mosul. So, and then this one you have is a Kurdish, a Turkish scholar. He comes up with the idea, actually, it was the Kemalists who were trying to, they kind of created or fomented the thing, the Sheikh Said's uprising. And he goes on saying that, yes, this is a conspiracy theory, but nonetheless it's theory. I mean, it's your own theory and your own conspiracy theory. What do you want to say? Anyways, so there are all this kind of conspiratorial thinking about this uprising. And then, so if you look, and actually I've used some of these Persian documents that they say how even now, despite the fact that Kurds in today's Iraqi side, today's Iranian side, they were all against Britain and against British policy in the region that now even Kurds in Iran after Sheikh Said thing, they are siding with with Britain because they hate Kemalists so much, and because the way they dealt with these sheikhs. So the fact that it pretty much sabotaged Kemalist plan, not Kemalists wouldn't be insane enough to create something that completely undermines their standing in or their position in Mosul. So and at the same time, thinking about the British colonial power trying to bring back the Ottoman Caliphate it's just insane, because actually there were Kemalists, and especially Mustafa Kemal was against the duality of the thing, trying to kind of separate the religious side of the caliphate from its political side. So before, the Ottoman caliph had two hats on. He was both sultan and a caliph. So, and colonial officers in Iraq, they were insisting that this what's called, that you have to have a separate political institution. Caliphate would be only a religious institution, and they didn't like caliphate because they felt it has a religious power that when it need to be, they might be able to mobilize people against the British colonialism. So they were, and in Lausanne, they had two conditions. This Lausanne Treaty that in 1923 takes place between Turkey and all other areas, especially with the other forces, but the main power was Britain. So they had this condition. They recognized modern Turkey and Kemal state on the condition that the caliphate would be destroyed, abolished. And the Kemalists were telling people that Sheikh Said worked for Britain to bring back Ottoman Caliphate. So, do you follow? Yes. Any questions, any issues?
I have two questions, if I may. I would like to know, first of all, you know, since a lot of these Sheikh were member of Naqshbandiya or Qadiriya orders, I would like to know, since I'm reading the PhD dissertation of Martin van Brunissen, he's arguing that the orders, the Qadiriya and Naqshbandiya orders, had like all this important in a political and social life in Kurdistan, like the role that they play was so important because they were representing a pattern of social organization that was independent of tribes, but as well of the state. I would like to know if this is, you agree with this idea?
So, especially in the 19th century, they became really powerful. And especially after Naqshbandi became reintroduced in a way and became very powerful from 1820s onward, after Maulana Khalid's reform. So, and yes, then just in the span of a few decades, you have all the Kurdish principalities were destroyed. While they were destroyed and the Ottoman state tried to occupy this region, and in reality, there was no Ottoman rule in the region. Before that, it was just mostly these peoples were autonomous. And you had various principalities. So the destruction of the principalities pretty much created a power vacuum that these religious figures became even more powerful. So in this sense, yes. Yes.
And then, if I may, sorry to bother you.
No, it's okay, there is no bother at all.
I would like to know in the rebellion of Sheikh Said, the people that were following him, the idea behind them was to fight against the or to have a resistance or rebellion against the power of the central government. I mean, the interference maybe with local affair, or was maybe more deep and being really a true defense of the Islam, like that the defense of Islam was the motivation behind the rebellion of Sheikh Said.
Yes. Sheikh Said's uprising was, from the perspective people like Sheikh Said, Kurdishness and Muslimness were not two separate things. They really, for them, it was the same thing. They were suspicious about the sincerity of, so for them that the Turkish state did not represent Islam, one. And secondly, from their perspective, it was a repressive state. And they felt they would be destroyed or something would happen with both their religiosity and ethnicity. So they were trying to create a state of their own, that Kurdishness and Muslimness would be celebrated, and it would be, and for them, these two things were not mutually exclusive in a way. And for them, for people like Sheikh Said, and I think I'm using a number of quotes from Hamid Bozar Islam's book, that for him, defending Kurdishness, it was a defense of Islam as well. Because the way they saw it, Kurds were the actual true Muslims. So I know it's for us, these dichotomous things are very clear, but perhaps for them it wasn't like this.
Are there difference in the motivations between Ubaidullah's revolt and Sheikh Said's revolt?
And I think there was probably one thing that there is one difference, and the difference is the fact that Kurds in 1920s, they were really concerned about their existence. For them, it was so imagine they had been through a lot after, during, and Michael Brzezinski says in some areas of Kurdistan, the Russians pretty much destroyed about 80% of the Kurdish population during the World War I. Even if this be an exaggerated thing, just imagine how devastating the whole situation has been. And at the same time, most of these regions were that Ottoman genocide takes place. And of course, there were certain areas that the Kurds were participating in that. But the fact that the Armenians might come back and wipe the Kurds out, and at the same time, they had already seen the brutality of the state in terms of dealing with the Armenians. And even imagine this is something that is very important, that 36 years before the Armenian genocide, Sheikh Ubaydullah tells the Russians that the Ottomans they want to use us against the Armenians. If Armenians destroyed, we will have no values. And other people will talk about it. The state will do to us what they have done to Armenians. So imagine the amount of horror that the Kurds had been exposed to. World War I, that, as Brzezinski says, destroyed about 80% of the population. Then you have this horror that before their eyes, all these Armenian kids and children and women were raped, destroyed, and and the way they moved them to die. I mean, we are talking about at least over 1 million people. And then, even after the 1915, 1916, the genocide continues in various forms under the Kemal state. So these people witness all these things. So this is something that at the time of Sheikh Ubaydullah had not existed. So this is one of the issues that made the issue of survival for the Kurds a lot more urgent, a lot more vital, or everything was, whoever was trying to create something for the Kurds, it was for them a matter of survival. So they could see their demise as as something imminent. This fear, this existential fear at the time of Sheikh Ubaydullah did not exist. This is something that in some ways makes it qualitatively different from Sheikh Ubaydullah's time. But in terms
often all this revolt or uprising from the Kurdish people, a lot of academic scholars are defining this uprising like reactionary, but I don't quite agree with this, because I'm always thinking about Sheikh Said. Of course, they were trying to defend or fight for a way of living that they know and was more safe of the one of the state that was the state was building is, so I don't quite agree. I was reading an article from Ali Balchi, professor from Sakarya University, that is
this is a Turkish nationalist.
Yeah, and it's really sometimes it's, sorry if I say it's awful.
Yes. No, most of these guys are fascists.
It's really difficult to.
Ali Balji is a fascist. And
because I talked to him, and I once talked to him about I have a soft spot for Sheikh Said. I had to admit it. And they talk about Sheikh Said, to him and about the role of Kurdish people inside the order of Qadriya and Naqshbandiya. And he was telling me, yeah, you cannot talk about this. You have to think what Islam did for Kurdish people, not what Kurdish people, the role of Kurdish people inside Islam. And I was quite shocked about this comment, you know, because if I think about those eminent people and even about, we talk about Said Nursi, it's difficult to don't accept this perspective, this point of view.
Yes, yes. I mean, unfortunately, even the Kurds are very much influenced by Kemalist discourse about this. As I said, even Abdullah Öcalan says that in one, so it's in a place he says he looks at him as a Kurdish nationalist, and another time he says he's a primitive nationalism. There is another time he says a mercenary of the British people. So yes, it's been, Kemalism has been inculcating these ideas for the last 100 years. And so it's, it really, we are talking about the people that have been massacred, that have been subject to various forms of assimilation, various forms of brutality of the state. And so the state, as Benjamin says, he doesn't leave them with just the death. After death too, they have to be framed and be, so this is the situation. And we are talking about all these huge state institutions and these powerful states that are trying to create a historical narrative. So it is only natural to find many people to think along the state line, because when you grew up and study in state institution, whatever they tell you, this is the reality. Even if there is limited Kurdish scholarship, it's only in dialogue and trying to bust to suppress some of the myths or the kind of deconstruct them, which is they have a very limited influence. And not to mention they themselves, they are the product of these very assimilating as institutions that, for example, some code that we didn't have time to talk about or all the Kurds that we mentioned in the Ottoman and the Iranian state, they refer to them as brigands, as ashqiya, which has a very strong religious connotation. For example, Quran about disbeliever says lafi shaqiyin ba'id. It's mostly like rejecting the religion itself in the strongest way, or they call them ashrar, means the absolute, especially in the Iranian context, like the absolute evil or absolute evil doer, in opposed to the khair or absolute goodness. So this is how, and so imagine if you grew up as a Kurd, because there is an environment that you feel you have been brutalized, you have been subject to all kind of injustice. Do you have a chance to see this stuff or understand them